Okay, so want to just really truly welcome everyone and thank you for taking the time out of your day to go over SAP Concur webinar. This is going to be one of many future monthly webinars that we're going to be hosting on a continual basis. And we value your feedback for various different types of topics to go forward in the next previous months. Some can be Concur release notes, some can be more related to invoice or expense or travel request or various different types of topics. So I want to welcome you all. And we're going to go over what it is to talk about invoice and purchase requests. And before we do, I just want to kind of introduce myself and what Phoenix Business Consulting is all about. So my name is David Szymanski. I am with Phoenix Consulting. Phoenix, is a premier provider of all SAP products and consulting services. So it's a very wide range of software products, not specifically just Concur, but it's all SAP related. So here's an overview of some of the services, and we have customers, over 250 plus customers, and over 175 plus consultants. We range really truly from both public sector and to the commercial enterprise. So it's a very, very wide range of consulting services that we do provide. This next screen that you see is we are a gold SAP partner, and we can deliver a suite of products, and we have a very, very strong presence in the United States and globally. All of our consultants here at Phoenix have at least a minimum of 10 years experience. And today I am here to talk about Concur. As you can see, Concur is part of the family of the suite of products that we host with Phoenix. So this is just a little bit of me. I am the one who's going to be presenting this to you today. And some of you may know me from my past former life, and some of us, we're getting new relationships, but I am a former Concur employee. I was with Concur for well over 15 years and started off as a functional consultant, kind of segued into the higher ed and the public sector vertical, and then worked in the learning service department, teaching all various different types of configurations, such as expense, travel request, invoice. And what's really critical and what's really key to understand with all the folks out there is that when you have a partner, it's that they are CIP certified. And that's what we are at Phoenix. We're certified in expense and we're certified in invoice. Essentially what that means is that it's a complement, it's a segue, it's a partnership with SAP Concur. So we understand the methodology, we understand the way it's delivered, and we understand Concur. So it's a very, very strong unity and partnership together. Today, this is just an overview and an agenda of what we're going to try to cover today. And some of the key topics is invoice capture. This is the OCR technology. This is where the magic happens. This is the scanning and uploading all the vendor invoices, turning those into an invoice. Vendor manager. Vendor manager is the functionality that you are maintaining and managing your vendors through an import. Configuration relationship diagram. So this is very key. This is a very key component to implementation and configuration as we design your system. Essentially, it's the blueprint, if you will, of how your system kind of links together and how that kind of goes into a invoice, how it goes into a purchase request, expense, travel request. All the array of SAP Concur functionality is based upon this relationship diagram. And I'll show you exactly how that looks. And then more importantly, I'll show you how that looks as it is relatable to Concur. And then lastly is I'm going to demonstrate creation, approving, processing, purchase request, and how that all correlates into an invoice. So this is really going to be a very interactive SAP Concur webinar, and we're going to take an in-depth look of how it works. Ask questions as you will. Uh, JL Diaz, Mr. JL Diaz is here for you to answer any questions. He'll be monitoring the chat as well. So anything that you do have, you can put in there or just freely speak up. And that's what makes it very important and engaging for everybody. So what is invoice capture? So this is a tool that we use, and it's processing the vendor invoices, and it's using two things. It's using the optical character recognition, OCR, and Leonardo learning machine. So essentially what it does, it learns from the behavior. So for example, if you're doing something with invoice capture and for whatever reason, it doesn't capture that information, the the person who has the capture verifying role can make those adjustments, and then it learns from that behavior. So in other words, if you try to do that again, it will take up that information that it missed and it learned, and then it will pre-populate that information in there as it relates to invoice capture. There are two things within Concur that capture invoice capture, and that is client managed, you, the customer, or Concur managed. Now, the difference is client managed is you're managing it. It comes into one of your queues, or key thing is the vendor can send it to an alias of an email. In other words, they send it to an email address, it will drop into the queue, and then you can go ahead and upload batches, you can control that, and you, the customer, are managing all the invoices that are coming into invoice capture. And then there's Concur Managed, and that's a staff of that manages a queue. It still goes through the OCR. That's the key thing. OCR is still that's the magic of how it all happens. So there's a couple of key features of what Concur Invoice Capture is. And it extracts the invoice details, such as what? Such as the vendor information, invoice number, any dates, amounts, the line item. It's very key. There's a line item that will break down all the expenditures. It continuously learns from the user of corrections to improve the accuracy of the data. So it's constantly learning from things that are maybe not getting captured. One of the major key things to invoice capture is the automation. It automatically matches the extracted data with those purchase orders and receipts, and it really makes it much, much easier to validate all the invoices. And it's cloud-based solution. And so this is part of the SAP Concur platform. Powerful. It integrates it seamlessly of all the Concur modules, such like expense or travel. So this solution aims to, it really minimizes the errors and reduces the processing time, and it provides a much better visibility into the spending and for reporting. So that's a lot of words to take in, but I'm going to show it to you in real time in a live demonstration. And then what we have is vendor manager. So what does vendor manager do? It's you are managing your authorized vendors. In other words, a user can't just go in and arbitrarily select any vendor that they want to do. It has to be an approved vendor, and these vendors get imported into the system. There's not a manual process. It's an import vendor that goes right into the system. And what are some of the key things that you can do is some of the mapping, such as you can map a default expense type. You can map an invoice owner. Some of the key, benefits for Vendor Manager, it enables the importing, it's the management of the vendor data directly from SAP Concur, and policy enforcement. That's very key because it enables your company policies for controlling which vendors are authorized to use or what are not authorized to use, and then vendor compliance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share and show you. I'll show you this in just one moment, but I want to show you here what that means. Okay, so first I talked about invoice capture. So inside of here, when you have the role assigned to you, everything that you see on the left-hand side is an application, meaning it's the functionality that you're able to do. Everything that you do see on the right-hand side is the configuration itself, how it gets configured within Concur. So we're dealing with, invoice. And when you have that manager role, vendor manager, or invoice capture verifier role assigned to you, you'll have the functionality of going right into here, looking at invoice capture. And if it's client managed, think of a vendor. Think of Home Depot. Think of, whatever vendor it may be that's sending in an invoice. They want to get paid. So where do they do? What do? They send it into invoice capture. So I'm going to just go ahead and upload a batch to the right-hand side. And this is what you would do if you were client managed. You're going to have the ability to come over here and then you're going to browse. And then this is the file format that in which vendors or invoices are accepted. So I'm going to just browse, and I have a one kind of preloaded. So this is the vendor that they sent it in to Concur, and I'm going to open this up, and I'm simply going to click one little button called Upload. Okay. Now what this is doing is you notice it says receiving, and it's in this task state called upload. What that means is inside of here. Now remember I said the left is kind of the functionality, the right is the configuration. So inside of here, I just want to show you the 4 stages that this is going to be going through. So there's a functionality called capture, processing, admin. What's happening now behind the scenes as I uploaded that batch, that OCR technology is going through these 4 stages automatically. And it could take minutes, it could take seconds, sometimes it could take an hour. It just depends on what's happening, like in anything else. Things sometimes do get delayed, but typically it's real time, and it could take a matter of maybe 60 seconds to 2 minutes tops. So it's going through all these different stages until it gets to this verification stage. What I always suggest, anytime we're doing an invoice implementation, is when you come into this verification, you want to come over here and say, capture attention to who? In other words, who are we going to send this to? And if it's set to no, that means these invoices will just go into an unassigned dumped queue. And then the processor would have to come in here and assign it. So this is a massively great shortcut by setting that a capture attention to yes. Automatically, and you're going to see it in a moment, when I assign this, it'll give me the ability to select who I want to assign this invoice to. Kind of did this for a reason, because I just wanted to make sure within those minutes that did get to the verification stage. So hopefully it did. So I'm going to go back to my invoice capture. And now it does say content extraction. So it's taking a little bit of time. It does take some time. I'm just going to refresh my computer one more time. The goal of this is to say verification. So it will, and I have one ready to go just in case if it didn't. So this is high level what invoice capture is all about. So the vendors are sending the invoice into invoice capture to do the verification. OCR is going to do the scanning. It's going to take all the information and it's going to pre-populate it and make it into a invoice. And there we go. Verification just became available. Vendor manager. Okay, I'm just going to switch gears just for a moment. I'm going to go to vendor manager. So what is vendor manager? Vendor manager is the ability to look at all your vendors. So how you do that is if you go into import vendors. There's import vendor access mapping, defaulting an expense type, and vendor mapping list. All this means there's a lot of functionality embedded behind it. Managing vendors to the very left-hand side will give you the ability coming all the way here to the right-hand side. And if you just click this little question mark here, that's going to give you all the vendors that are inside of the system. There's many, many different types of ways to filter and find whatever vendor that you want to look at. You can come over here and search by the vendor code, the address, any of this appropriate information. But the easiest is just clicking this little question mark, and then you can go ahead and find all your vendors. A very, very great functionality with this, and unfortunately, Expense doesn't have this too often in certain areas, but in Invoice it does, is that you can take your vendors and you can extract them and you can put them into an Excel template. So if I was to say, I want to look at all my vendors and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to extract those vendors and I'm going to put it into an Excel template. So think of this as your master data. This is what you're going to control. So now you have this master template. You can control vendors. You can remove vendors. You can deactivate vendors. And then you just go ahead and just re-import your vendors into the system. So you can take what's in Concur and extract it and put it into an Excel format. If you choose to look at a specific vendor, for example, Aircom, you can look at the granular details of what this vendor is, the contact name and such. You can map. So for let's say you decide Planet Recruiting is a vendor that you want to deal with, and you want to say, no matter what happens, I want to manage that and I want to always give this an expense type. So if I go into Planet Recruiting as my vendor, I'm going to assign a default expense type. When I select that, that doesn't mean that's the only expense type you can use. It's just the starting point. So it's defaulting that vendor to that expense type. Or if you always want to have a default owner, no matter what happens, if I want to go to ABC Office Supplies and I'm going to assign a default owner, regardless of what's going on, I can come in here and I can just click this. There's a little percentage sign. It's like a wildcard sign. I can click right in here and then I could select maybe that person, assign it. Now that person, Paige Turner, will be the invoice owner for that particular vendor. That's kind of behind the scenes of how the functionality of invoice capture works, how vendor manager works, high level. Where I think you would really be beneficial is to understand how it works as an end user, the end-to-end process. Any questions so far as I go through this? Okay. So this configuration relationship diagram, I love to show this to customers because truly it's a good way of visually looking at how your system is going to be implemented or configured. You always have a group and you always have a user. These two go hand in hand. This user is going to have a ledger that's attached to them. It's a one-to-one relationship. And this is all based upon your user profile. Everyone is going to have a profile. You have to have a ledger attached to your user profile. You must be in a country and you must be in a group. You must have a language pack, localization, and you must have a currency assigned to you in your user profile. There's a lot more other things that get rolled up into a user profile, but the user attaches to a group. That's very key, very, very key. Why do we have a group? What's the rationale reason why Concur has to have group and group aware type things? It's for the differentiator. What is differentiating one group from another group? And that's it. There's nothing more complicated than that. Some clients can have 10 groups, they can have 25 groups, they can have 2 groups. It's the differentiator. In other words, if I had a group called relocation group, and they're only allowed to do invoices up to $5,000, that is a reason why I would have a group. And if I had another group that said they have carte blanche, they can do as much, $1 million. So we need to differentiate one group from another. And that's the reason why we have group aware. And ultimately, this group comes down to the policy. Now, I know policy within the public sector or the enterprise business, the word policy for customers thinks of compliance, regulations, guidelines, such. No, that's not what it means in Concur. It's very important to understand the group, and it's very important to understand the policy, because the policy drives the functionality. And what is that functionality? It's your form. It's the form that you're looking at, the creation of that report header form or that invoice form. It's the visual look of your expense types and the workflow, the routing in which you want your invoice to go to. So the group attaches to the policy. Okay, just kind of want to give you a kind of a brief kind of functionality, kind of down and dirty of what that is and as it relates to Concur. But now let's do the end-to-end process. Let's go ahead and create a purchase request, and let's turn that purchase request into a purchase order. And ultimately, let's turn that PO into an invoice. So if you have the role assigned to you as a user, you're going to come in, you're going to log in, and you're going to go right into Concur. And the beauty of Concur is it's the role that you have. If you have an invoice role, you have functionality. If you have an expense role, you have functionality. You do not need to sign into 2 different types of modules. You're signing into one application. So on the right-hand side, we have these things called cart items. And what we want to do is we're going to build our cart, just like if y'all went to Amazon, the same concept. You're building. So you're going on there, and we have PRPO policy. This is locked down. This is the policy in which I belong to. And then you have goods or services. So in this case, we are looking for goods. We want to look for the vendor. So think of yourself, you went out there, you did all the due diligence, you did all the hard work, you looked at a magazine, you went to the website, the URL, and you want to purchase something. So these are some of the most recently used vendors that we have. But if you want to look for more vendors that are in the system, clicking the search more options will give you the ability. You can find it by the name or any of this other criteria. Or the easiest thing is click this little question mark, or I shouldn't say question mark. That's a, what do you call that? Magnifying glass. And then now you want to go ahead and select any of the vendors that are in the system. So in my case, I'm going to select Cranks Manufacturing. It will pre-populate the vendor information here. And this went to an undefined expense type. So I want to say, what expense type do I think I want to put? So maybe it's going to be hardware. And then 1403 is the GL count code that is preceding it. Doesn't have to be there. This is just a configurational thing. Usually with invoice, that's kind of the norm of putting the GL count code prior to the expense type. And then I'm going to put a description. What am I doing? I want to do, I looked at a URL, I looked at an internet, I looked at a magazine, and I'm purchasing a 1x2 tubed piping. This is kind of the description of I want. And I want to have, I'm going to purchase 85 of these. So I'm putting the quantity of 85. Each unit of measure, this is all very highly configurable. Box, hour, dozen. maybe if you were working for a pharmaceutical company, you're dealing with milliliters or something like that. So this is a very configurable item is the unit of measure. In this case, it's going to be each, and my unit price is, $12.25. And then I want to save that. I'm going to add more information to my cart. So I want to add something called, I'll select another expense type, maybe hardware again. And my description in this case is 1x4. So this is just another preference that I've used for my description. And in this case, I want my quantity to be 100. And my unit price is $16.25. This is a configurable item. What we're looking at here, this is the most granular level. So this is called the expense line detail form. And then if I click save, I will do this one more time just to add more to my cart. And I want to add another expense type. And I'm going to call this again hardware. My description is 1x8 tubing. And then here, my quantity is going to be 16. And I'll say this is at $21.25. I don't know what shipping and tax is, because it has to be, from the vendor. So this is what I want to go ahead and request. And then it gives me the total of $3,006.25. So if I'm satisfied, or if you're happy with this, and this is what you want to request for your pre-authorization, we're going to go ahead and here at the bottom, click the request button. So our goal here is to turn this into a purchase request number. And right now it's not there until I finish up the blanks. Think of this, if you're in the expense world, think of this as your header, your report header. And it says the details, but we're going to put in the description. So we want tubed piping. This is highly configurable. This information, remember I was showing you the configuration relationship diagram and we had a group and a user. Well, these are the cost objects that live on that person's profile. And you can have that information copy into this header, or it could be read only. It could be hidden. The options are up to you. And I can change this by this little drop down if I wanted to, change my cost objects in here. Where do I want to ship it to? I'm going to ship it to that address, and I'm going to bill it to this address. Within Concur, as you have purchase requests, you can have hundreds of shipping addresses too. And then, you would just select, pick and choose. Once I select this, now when I click save, that's going to generate a purchase request number 14. Now it's a system of record. It gives me a breakdown of each expenditure. I can see my GL string. It's all concatenated together. The powerful functionality with Concur is this, and this drives many, many things, is the ability to do distribution, cross-charging, or allocation. So if I wanted to take all of these lines and I want to click the word distribution, I'm going to go ahead and distribute it by the selected items. In other words, I'm going to take my GL string, 100%. This is my cost objects that I'm tracking. I'm going to click add. And maybe I want to say, instead of going it to this cost object, it's going to go to there. Or if it's going to go to this cost object code, it's going to go to B. And maybe there's a reference code, it's not applicable. So now I have a 50-50 split on all of those expense line items. And you can distribute it on all or one. It doesn't matter. The choice is yours. It's very, very flexible. It's very repeatable. This could have a lot of impact on a workflow. based upon wherever you want that routing to go to. So if I'm going to click save, I just allocated it to a different GL string, as you can see. Here's my account codes, and here's the distribution of those codes. A very, very slick feature that you will not see in expense, but you will absolutely see in invoice is this distribution again. If you wanted to import your distributions through an import, because the invoice world is maybe you have, 25 lines of distribution. Instead of doing it manually, you can go ahead and download a template, save this template to your computer, and put in the appropriate information, and you can continually using this. And the next time you do it, you can use your template again. So it's a nice feature to have. It's something that expense doesn't have, but invoice has it. It's the ability to do it by selected items or an imported item. So at this stage, as a user, you did your purchase request, you've got your line items that you want, you did your distribution. There's a few things you can do for validation and some checking. Is this approval flow? Where is this going to route to? Is it going to go to various different cost objects? Is it going to get split? Is it going to go through an authorized approver with dollar signing authority? There's a lot of very flexibility with Concur workflows that we can go ahead and build. But this is going to tell me it's going to go to this person for approval. Audit trail will be there once I submit this, because once you submit it, it starts the date and timestamp. So at this very point, I'm going to go ahead and just submit this so you can see the ease of use. So I'm going to just go ahead and submit this purchase request. And now off it goes. So it's going to go to the approver. The beauty of Concur is that now an email automatically, simultaneously gets generated to that approver. And that's their visual cue saying, I have something to do. I have some work I have to do. I got an email notification. This user doesn't have to go ahead and remind anybody. So now I'm going to go back in as the approver of this. Approver signs in, and here it is. It's a required approval. So they're going to click into here. This is their work, and everything's been kind of allocated. So what does an approver do? There's a few things that approver can do is validation. They could do approve, and that will take it, and it'll take it to the next section. Could be a more complicated workflow. It could be very natural. They can send it back. If they have reason to believe they have questions, by clicking send back, they would put a comment why they're sending that back, and then it goes back to the user. Or this functionality, and this applies to expense as well, is called approve and forward. What does that mean? I am going to approve this, but I'm going to add another set of eyes to validate this, because maybe internally you know where you want this to go based on a cost object. So I can put in another approver. Now they have to be a purchase request approver. I can put that person's name, it will pick up the email, and then I am going to approve this request, and then it's going to upline to that person that I want to visually see this. And that person can do the same thing and can keep on going as to many different directions as you finally want to go to. So I'm going to say, yes, I'm going to approve this as the approver. I'm going to switch gears for a moment. I'm going to bring this here. I'm going to move that out. And now it goes into a purchase request processor. There's two things. There's a purchase request processor, and there's a purchase request processor for purchase orders. So again, applications to the left is functionality. Administration to the right is the functionality. So I'm going to go into the request queue, and I'm going to go to purchase requests. Now this person does not get any email notifications to them at all whatsoever. They manage a queue all day. And here is the last stage of this particular workflow. And it says purchase request number 14. So they're validating what was submitted. They're validating what was approved. And now it's at this very last stage as the purchase request processor. They can see the cost objects that were indicated. What can this person do? Well, a couple of actions. If there's reason to believe they want to send this back, let's send it back. But now, not generically sending it back with just a comment, you can come up with what we call reason categories and codes. And this applies to expense as well. Reasons why you're sending something back. So now the processor will have a list of reasons and they don't have to explain themselves why. They can just say, please see above. And this is the reason why we're kicking this back or we're rejecting it. The beauty of having reason categories and codes is it's reportable data. You can run historical reports on that. If you approve it, that's what we're going to do, and it's going to turn into a purchase order. So I'm going to go ahead and approve this. And then I'm going to go right back to my purchase request queue, and I'm going to hover down to where it says process purchase orders. And now we have one called Phoenix PHX 111. That is my PO. This is what needs to be transmitted to the vendor. The vendor's going to get this, and then they're going to do their work. They're going to go to the factory. They're going to go to the warehouse. They're going to fulfill it. And then what they are going to do once they finish their obligation is they need to get paid, right? So they're going to send their invoice. Where do they send it? They send it to invoice capture. They send it into an email. However, to do this, so we want to just preview it. So clicking this little preview button here will give you the opportunity to look at what the purchase order is. And I apologize if this is a little small, if you can't see it all, but this is the vendor information. This is all the detailed information of the expense lines, the description, quantity, unit price. And you notice there's no shipping and there's no tax. We have no idea what shipping and tax is yet. The vendor will put that in there. So in order to transmit this, I need to have an email address. So think of this going to the vendor. So I'm just going to put my email address in here. And then I'm going to transmit it. So off it goes. It goes to the vendor. Vendor comes in, they do their work. They send it into invoice capture, which is going to be here. Remember, this is the application. Invoice capture. Client managed or Concur managed, it doesn't matter. Here's both of those. Now, as you can see, it says verification. Once it gets to that last stage of called verification, now this is where you're going to see the optical character recognition, the OCR. So what it did, it took Cranks Manufacturing and everything that you see in blue, that's the OCR scanning. And it took all this information to the right-hand side and it pre-populated it to the left-hand side of creating the invoice. Now, I do notice a couple of things that are not exactly 100% correct, and that's okay. This is why it's a learning machine. It learns from this behavior. Quantity 85, 116. 85, 116. That's good. The unit price is also good. It's matching all this and it's correlating it to the left-hand side. However, if you notice, that just says goods. It doesn't say 1.5 or 1/2 tube piping. So the person who has this responsibility can easily come in here and just change that. Now you have the ability to go ahead and make that little correction. Now, the next time I do this, that will automatically scan the correct information. So in other words, if this was Concur managed, this would go to a queue and they would make sure that they're validating all the different requirements. So now we have an invoice here. We've got the vendor information here. But what if it was the wrong vendor? What if it said, Aircom, or it said, ABC? You have the ability to come in here, click change, and you can find the vendor, and then you can go ahead and change it to the correct vendor if you needed to change that vendor. Now it's populating the invoice detail. Here's the invoice number, 1119647, 1119647. So it's scanning this, populating it to the left. It's inclusive of shipping and tax because now the vendor says, here's my tax, here's the shipping cost. So it's going to take all this information, it's going to populate it here and give me my total invoice. Now there are what we call PO matching rule sets, which is going to be matching, three things. It's going to be matching the receipts, the quantity, and making sure that all that is going to be matched together too as well. So there's two things that now what you can do. You could either go ahead and submit this, but if I did, it would basically submit it to an unsubmitted or unassigned queue. The vendor capture verifier person can come right over here, and this is where it came from, that verification. And now I want to say I'm taking this invoice and I'm going to assign it to that person. So now marketeer, that's the guy who's going to be getting this invoice. When I click submit, I'm going to submit this batch and it's going to ask me a question. And it says, are you sure you want to submit this batch? Submitting this batch, what does it do? It creates the invoice. So I'm going to say, yes, I do want to do it. If I go back into this person named marketeer, there it is. This is the invoice that's been automatically created. He didn't have to do anything. All the OCR scanned all the information and it created the invoice. There may be some things that he may have to do. Like for example, I do see undefined expense type. He can go in here and put in whatever the expense type that is. And then the learning machine, next time it learns from that behavior, it will automatically create that expense type. It's going to give me any information that's on the invoice header. So it pre-populates all the vendor information through invoice capture. It pre-populates it. It gives you the ability to assign it to a user. And now this user would just go ahead and submit the invoice. A recommendation, a best practice for Concur is, think about this. If it went through the request workflow, and let's say it was complicated. Let's say it went through an authorized approver with signing authority, and then it broke it down to a cost object workflow based on allocations, and it went through all these various different chains workflow. Now the invoice owner gets this invoice because it's been created through the travel request. Do you want it to go to that same identical workflow? That question is up to you. Our recommendation is no, we would build skip steps if the purchase order matches to the invoice. So in other words, if the PO matches to the invoice, it's not necessary to go to this approver and to this approver. It would just go to the submission, and that would be the final system of record. If the purchase order does not match to the invoice, then yes, it would go through whatever workflow you want. So we're all used to expense in Concur, and it's pretty straightforward. Submission, approval, processor. You have a policy. With the invoice and purchase request, you have two workflows. You have a purchase request workflow, and then you have an invoice workflow working together. And then the key is on your invoice workflow, if the purchase order is matching to the invoice, is to build in skip steps, validating skip steps that it's not necessary for it to go to the same approvals after it's been approved and requested, a few times over. So today is I hope you enjoyed this, or I hope you got an idea, a flavor of some of the capabilities and the strong powerfulness of the request, how it turns that request into a PO, how that PO turns it into an invoice, and you can kind of see the flow of the workflows and all the various different users involved, especially as it relates to invoice capture, the scanning of OCR, and managing your vendors. So now I'm going to leave it up to you. Does anybody have any specific questions for me that I can help you with? Or is there anything in the chat, JL, that I can answer in the chat?
Let me check. There is one. David, can you export vendors out of Concur? I think that's a question.
Most definitely you can. Absolutely. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so in here, let me get out this screen, go into a different screen. It's a really great functionality, and what it is, it gives you the ability. So in the invoice tab, remember invoice is application, it's the functionality. So vendor manager, clients do this all the time because they're creating their master list. So right now, if I want to go look, like right now, I'm looking at, user requested vendors. That means this person requested a vendor. It didn't necessarily mean it's going to be approved. So setting this to approved vendors, you get a list of all the various vendors that you have in your system. You could have pages and hundreds of different vendors. And then what you would do is click here. So you're identifying all the vendors and coming over here to your Excel and send to Excel, and you're exporting them into your master vendor list. So that's a great question. And in addition to that question is you cannot put a vendor into the system manually. It's got to be part of the vendor import. It must be part of this vendor import. That's a really good question.
Okay. Guys, if you have any question, you can raise your hand and you can ask your question in person or using the microphone as a or you can use the chat function or the Q&A function in the Zoom. Okay, let's see. David, another question
Mhm.
says, when creating a purchase request, can you assign your own vendor?
Very good question. No, you cannot. What you can do is you can request a vendor. So I'll show you that. I always like to show versus just tell you. So let's say, for example, this person, oh my goodness. Okay, so let's say this person wants to do a purchase request. And there's a vendor out there that it's not part of the list. It's not part of all these different vendors. So see where it says search vendor. So you're looking at all the various vendors. So let's say there's something out here called home stores. Just totally making that up. I can't request home stores. I can't do anything with it. But what you can do, yes, is you can request that vendor right here. Request vendor. You're thinking, hey, this might be a good vendor I want to put in. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to request this vendor, home stores. I'm going to put in as much information that I possibly can put in here. So, what this is in the United States. maybe the first name. Maybe any of this appropriate information. Do they have a 1099? Is it part of their setup? Yes, no. So you can fill up as much as this information that they want. And then when you hit OK, you are just saying, I would like to use this vendor. And believe it or not, you could go ahead, the user can go ahead and fill out to a certain point of what they want to do, but it will not get processed through because it's not an approved vendor. The way it gets to be an approved vendor is that the vendor manager, with the role that they have, when they go into vendor manager, they will see home stores is unapproved. So what do? They can say, no, we're not, I don't care that the person wants this. This is not part of our policy. So I'm going to reject this and I'm going to decline this vendor. If they decide, yes, we do want this is a great idea, I want this to be part of our vendor, they would put this into the master template. That's the beauty of exporting that into an Excel template and then re-importing that in there. And now home stores would become part of the approved vendors. So a user can always request, but it needs to go through the approved process through the company of saying, yes, I'm going to approve it or I'm going to decline it. All right. Was there any other questions that you had out there?
Let me see. I don't have anything in the chat and the Q&A. I don't have anything anywhere.
Okay. All right. Good. Um, we're just scratching the surface. This is a high level kind of the idea behind it so you can see the ease of use of how this is. If Phoenix Consulting gets into a situation where we need to gather business requirements and discuss different things, it will get into the granular of your specific business requirements and your business requirement needs. But SAP Concur, the beauty and the power of SAP Concur is not signing into two different applications. It is cloud-based. It's one application with the role that you have, giving you the flexibility, giving you the ability to do expense, travel request, purchase request, invoice, all in one sign-in. So it depends on what you have, and it depends on what you purchase, and depends on what your need is. It sits in one platform. If there is no other questions, we're going to have this recorded out, so we'll be able to send you the recording of this. And if you do have any other questions, pressing later, you can always send it to us. We'll be very happy to look at that and very happy to talk to you. So I hope you found this informative. I hope you kind of gained a little bit of insight about what SAP Concur can do, a little bit more about Phoenix Consulting and how we can help you. And please look forward to other future up and coming webinars. And we're very happy that you took the time today to do this. I know time is very valuable, and we really appreciate that you did take the time to join us on this webinar. So with no other questions, I will give you back to your day. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
wait.
you.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a question from Lisa. Just came in. Can you ask Dave if there's any additional invoice sessions since we are late in joining? Oh, Lisa Lango.
You know what? Oh, Lisa, I am so glad that you said that because my mistake. I apologize, guys. For those who are still on, yes, please scan this QR code here. And there's a survey, and I neglected to tell you this in the beginning. It's my fault. I should have told you this, but there's a little survey, and it has some questions on there of what future topics that you would prefer to have in the future for Concur or for these webinars. So those who did leave early, I will make sure that they get this so they can participate and have that. But if you could fill that out, there's 3 little questions on there of what you thought this was like today and any future topics you would like to talk about.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank